Hey, this is Shawn Ryan, and you are watching the TV Writer Podcast.
My name is Gray Jones, and I want to welcome you to the TV Writer Podcast, partner of Script Magazine, episode 101 for Tuesday, June 9th, 2020. Well, today I have an interview with somebody who probably needs no introduction, and that is Shawn Ryan, who has created or co-created so many series, including The Shield, Chicago Code, Last Resort, Timeless, and his current series SWAT. And he's got a lot of great stories to tell, including, and I know there's going to be a lot of people interested in this, he does talk legitimately about future prospects for Timeless. This episode is sponsored by Pilar Alessandra of onthepage.tv. Be sure to check out all the resources and classes on her site, and she also offers one-on-one coaching via Zoom. TV Writer Podcast viewers can get 10% off on any of her services. Just reach out to Pilar directly and tell her I sent you. If you want to help me to continue to bring these weekly episodes to you, please consider becoming a patron or sponsor for as little as 25 cents per episode. And there are reward levels for different amounts. Visit tvwriterpodcast.com/support for details. You're going to love the interview. Let's roll. Well, I'm so excited to be here with veteran show creator and showrunner Shawn Ryan, who has created or co-created a number of series, including The Shield, The Chicago Code, Last Resort, Timeless, and his current series SWAT. How are you doing, Shawn?
I'm very well, Gray. Thank you for joining me virtually today during this pandemic and talking writing. Happy to be here.
Well, I know that this episode is going to be especially exciting because it's really hard to get a TV show off the ground. There's thousands of pitches that are done every year to the networks, and very few get shot. Even fewer get to series. And you've been able to create or co-create quite a few shows, and I hope that the wisdom that you have to share will help people as they are writing their own pilots and as they're trying to sell their own projects.
Yeah, it's a very competitive industry. I've been fortunate that I've had some pitches that have made its way all the way through and got on the air and stayed on the air. I've had my share of tragedies too, of projects that I loved that I was unable to get launched either at script stage or at pilot stage. And, sometimes we remember our losses more than we treasure our wins. And so,
especially as writers.
Yeah. So I still have little sore spots in me, little wounds from things that I felt super passionate about that I couldn't get. But no, I've been very fortunate to work with great people and to get, a number of TV shows on the air, including some that I didn't create, but I supervised, things like Mad Dogs, which Chris Cole created, The Unit, which David Mamet created. And so I enjoy doing that as well sometimes, having partners who have a vision for something that I can help with.
Very, very cool. Speaking about times that things don't happen the way you plan, where are you at with the virus? How's that affected you?
Well, we're not friends. And the virus has not been kind to me or to the world. But I was telling someone, you almost feel guilty and bad saying this, but I would say I and my job are more suited for this situation than most people. I'm used to spending a lot of time isolated and writing and, on my laptop dealing with a dozen different things, via email coming through. It's been a lot harder on my wife and my kids. I have a daughter who had to return home from college, and she was having a great time in college in New York State. And, so she's not thrilled that she's separated from her friends and her new sorority and, and being able to do classes in person. I have a son who's in high school, who this is a real adjustment for him. And it's hard. So for me personally, it's been okay. Professionally, it's been okay. I'm fortunate. We have a nice house, and I'm in a guest house that we built a while ago. Right now, I can get some isolation and some privacy. We're more fortunate than most to have a nice place to sort of hang out in. But emotionally, it's been hard on a family level, and so I've tried to be a support system, for my family in that regard. It's hard, and I'm totally aware that it's hard on a lot of people. I have a couple of cousins in Rockford, Illinois, where I'm from, who are medical assistants and nurses, and I worry a lot about them and how they're doing in all this.
Yeah, it's certainly been very humbling.
Yeah, it really is. The word game changer gets thrown around a lot, but this is a game changer in terms of really reevaluating life and priorities and what's important and what's not. And I've just been trying to do my part and not get infected and not infect others, and do my bi-weekly grocery shop with mask and gloves, and try to research like what grocery store is the best one to go to at what times, so as to not be amongst a crowd if possible, and just try to do our part. And then SWAT. We ended up filming 21 out of our planned 22 episodes, but for the last, I think this is week 5 maybe of quarantine for me and most people. But those 5 weeks have been filled with a lot of post-production work, cuts coming in. I think we locked picture on at least 2 and maybe 3 episodes during this quarantine. So, I would download, the director's cut and then producer cuts and give notes via email, and there's always sort of sound notes, and there's VFX things. So in some ways, it's been business as usual, although that's running out. We only have 2 more new episodes to air, and by the time people see this, the episodes will have already aired. But it's crazy. It's crazy to wake up and think, oh, I can't really go out. I can't go to my favorite restaurant. The most you might be able to do is take the dog for a walk around the block. It's weird.
Yeah. Well, you talked a little bit about growing up in Illinois. I wanted to mention you had a really auspicious beginning. Talk about winning the Norman Lear Playwriting Award and what that did for your career.
Yeah, it was called something different by the time I won it. It was at that point called like the Sony Pictures Television Comedy Playwright Award, but it had historically been the Norman Lear Award. It was a real big boost at the start, and then I kind of squandered it, and then had to go through, all the paying my dues that most everyone does in this town. But I'd written, I'd started writing plays in college. Before college, I'd never written anything creatively. I'd only written essays for English classes and things like that, and always hated I hated writing academic papers. I was not a fan of that. But I had dabbled in theater in high school, both at my school, and then I was actually in a professional production of On Golden Pond, playing Billy, the kid that's in that, if you ever saw the movie or if you ever seen the play. And I did like 35 performances of that at the one professional theater in Rockford, Illinois. And so I'd always been interested in theater, and in college I started taking some theater classes. And one of the things I had to do for one of them was to write a 5-minute scene and have other kids from the class act in them. And I wrote my 5-minute scene, and I thought that I would be the only person. It was filled with like inside jokes between me and my best friends at college. I didn't think anyone would get it. And as leaving the class that day, it was the last class of my freshman year, getting ready to go back home to Illinois, the professor called me back and said, "Hey, your scene was really good. I think you have a talent for this, and I'm teaching a playwriting class next year, and I really think you should take it." And that moment really changed my life. And so I wrote a play, and he produced that play along with a few others from that class. And then I changed my major. And so for my thesis project, I wrote a full-length play, and a different theater professor liked it, and he wanted to produce it as part of the official theater department program, which he did. And he pestered me into entering it into these various competitions, which, I thought there was no chance, and it did win. And so part of that award was to bring me out to Los Angeles and let me spend 2 weeks observing in the writer's room of one of Columbia Picture, then now Sony, one of their shows. That show turned out to be My Dads, the Paul Reiser, Greg Evigan, a young Giovanni Ribisi was in that show. And so I just got to observe, and then I ended up. I don't know what gave me the balls to do this, but when the 2 weeks was over, Bob Meyer, who was running that show, I said, "Hey, I know you're still a couple episodes shy of things. Would it be okay if I came in and pitched you some ideas like in a week?" And for some reason he said yes. And a week later I came in and I pitched some ideas. And there was one that he just really liked the one sentence nugget. He didn't like what I had fleshed out. But he liked this nugget, and he just started ripping. And, well, you could do this, you could do that, you could do this. And we spent like 20 minutes, and really he kind of broke it. But it's like, yeah, we should do that. And the next thing I knew, they were handing that idea off to two of their staff writers on the show, and like literally 3 weeks later, they were filming it.
Wow.
And so I thought, well, I was 23 years old at the time in 1990. And I thought, well, I've made it. Hollywood has discovered the immense talent that is Shawn Ryan. And now I will just sort of sit here and field offers from agents and studios, and I'll just see where this takes me. And sitting on my ass waiting for Hollywood to kiss my ass, it did not work, as it turned out. That was not a successful approach to the business. And it took me a year, and it took me running out of the money that I had made selling the story to them, and having to go get day jobs outside the industry to support myself, to make me realize, oh, I guess this isn't going to be so easy. I guess this isn't. This is something I'm actually going to have to work hard for. And so it really changed my perspective on things, and it really forced me to up my work ethic, to really start, treating this as a craft and a profession that I had to take super seriously. Because I was fortunate. I had talent as a writer from the very first thing I wrote. I was a clever writer, but I wasn't a good, deep writer. And that's what I had to discover, was my clever writing got me some attention early on. But you have to be more than just a clever writer to really sort of work in this town. And so I had to grow up. I had to become an adult. I had to get life experience. I banged out 16, 17 different spec scripts during that 4.5 year period between selling the story and then my next paying gig. And I just, worked hard and did what most people who succeed in this business do. I just worked on my craft. I worked hard. Yeah. But I also got lucky in many ways. And I always try to say that when people, when I have students or young people asking about breaking in, I always say that there are three factors that determine whether you're going to be a success in this town. And unfortunately, you can only control one. There's luck, which you can't control, which I certainly had my fair share of. There's talent, which you really can't control. You might be able to nudge it up a little bit, by working your craft and learning. And then there's determination and hard work, and that is the one that you can control. And so I always say, focus on that. And because in my experience, the people who get lucky are usually the ones that have worked hard and have determination. So yeah, it was a big break for me to win this award. It was a pretty cool thing to be able to say that I had won this award. Within a month of being out here, the award meant nothing.
Wow.
But the good part was it did bring me out here. I'd never been to Los Angeles. Excuse me. I didn't know anyone in Los Angeles. That's not entirely. There was one unemployed actor I knew who I'd met at a playwrights retreat, who he had just moved out 6 months previously. That was Jay Carn, who played Dutch in The Shield. He was the one person I knew. And so the award gave me the courage to come out here, because it literally brought me out here, put me up in a hotel for the first 2 weeks, and got me used to LA so that I could say, okay, I'm going to stay here. I don't know if I would have had the guts to just sort of move here on my own and say, I want to be a writer. So that's what that award did for me. It got me out here. It got my foot in the door. And then it took another 4.5 years before I started to make money as a writer, and another 5. So I moved here in 1990, and I started in the latter part of 1995, early part of 1996. That's when I started to be able to support myself as a writer. So it took a while.
And so what was your first staff gig? Was that Nash Bridges?
It was. I'd gotten some freelance work. Like I had, there was a there was a kids animated show called Life with Louie that was based on Louis Anderson's career, and Louie did it was based on his childhood, and he did a voice. And it was a really, really good show if you can find it. It's a really good show for kids to watch. It's sort of timeless. And so I got hired to do a freelance episode of that show, and they really liked what I did, and they hired me to do 2 other episodes. So I done that. There were a couple of pilot ideas I pitched that people paid me to write that never got made, but I earned a living. And then Nash Bridges was my first staff job. It was interesting because I'd sort of broken through, and now I had a couple of spec scripts that people really liked, and I'd been trying to staff for the previous 3, 4, 5 years and was unsuccessful. And I was kind of going back and forth. Did I want to be a comedy writer? Did I want to be a drama writer? And I was writing spec scripts in both genres. Oh, really? I would write a spec Seinfeld and then write a spec NYPD Blue. And so I was going on meetings for both comedies and dramas. And ultimately what happened was I had 2 meetings in the same week that both felt very serious. One was I met with Joss Whedon for Buffy the Vampire Slayer season 2. And then I met Carlton, Cuse, and John Worth for Nash Bridges season 3. And I had sort of watched a lot of episodes of both shows, and they were very different shows, obviously. And ultimately, Joss decided not to hire me on Buffy, and I was sort of devastated. But then a day or 2 later, an offer came from Nash. And so, that would have been May of 1997. So I moved out here in 1990, and in May of 1997, I got my first staff job.
Wow. Well, I think it's good for people to know, because I think there's definitely this illusion for a lot of people that when you break in, that suddenly it's smooth sailing. And I don't know anybody I talk to that's true for. It's like the overnight success that takes 10 years is what I hear from most people.
Yeah, and listen, it was the best thing in the world that could have happened to me to have this struggle. I really needed to have those years of struggle where I realized that I had to become a better writer, that what I was doing just wasn't good enough to get hired. And which is frustrating because you watch TV, and especially back then, because TV, I think, has really improved as a genre. But back then you'd watch, and there was a lot of bad TV. And you would just be, oh my God, how could I not get hired? I'm watching these shows, but then you'd find out afterwards, well, maybe something good was written, and maybe there were problems with the actors, or maybe they had production issues, or maybe there were budget issues. But you would just feel like, oh my God, I've got to do this. I've got to do this. I've got to get better. I've got to get better. And without that struggle, I don't think I would have achieved the things that I ended up achieving. And I don't think, and believe me, I don't think I'm the perfect writer. And I still to this day am looking for ways to improve as a writer. But I wouldn't be the writer I am without those years of struggle. And I look back and I'm extraordinarily grateful that, that I didn't start, having success in Hollywood and being able to start making some money until, I was close to 30 when I was ready for it. 23 would have, to come here and just sort of have instant acceptance in the industry, I don't know that I would have learned the right lessons in that regard. And so I'm ultimately very, very happy with how it turned out for me. And I wouldn't change anything. I wouldn't give away those times. In some ways, it's amongst the happiest times of my life. I enjoyed the struggle. I embraced it. I said, I'm chasing a dream. I'm chasing something I want to do. I'm not going to business school. I'm not, doing a job that's going to sort of suck my soul. And this is a sacrifice I have to make to pursue it. And I was ultimately really glad about making that sacrifice.
Very cool. Very cool. And so you were on Nash Bridges with Carlton, Cuse. Was that sort of your training ground?
Yeah, and once again, this is where luck goes into it, right? I wanted that Buffy the Vampire Slayer job. I really dug that show, and I could tell, they'd only done 1 season at that point. And the luckiest thing that happened to me was Joss not hiring me for that show. Because after Nash, I went to work for him on Angel. And I was like, oh man, if I didn't have the 3 years of Nash, I don't know that I would survive here.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I would do okay. And I still struggled a little bit. So if I had been hired on Buffy, I don't think I would have survived. I don't think I would have succeeded. So, but I did 3 seasons on Nash. Carlton and John Worth are the consummate pros. They believed in a very collaborative writer's room that ultimately was just a great story engine lesson for me. There were only 6 of us, and Carlton had a lot of showrunner responsibilities, so there were a lot of times that he wasn't in the room, which meant that there were a lot of times there were only 5 of us in the room. And we had to break anywhere between 22 and 24 episodes a season. Wow. We would film Nash in 7 business days, unlike the 8 business days that is pretty standard now, which meant that we had to break a new episode every 7 business days.
Wow.
And so it became, and there was a mixture of drama and comedy, and they were all smart. And Carlton and John both cared about being a mentor. Not everyone in this business, cares about that. They look at it like a business. I've hired you to be a professional writer. Be a professional writer. Learn on your own time. But John was always full of sort of life lessons and business lessons. I never forget him just going up to the whiteboard in the room one day, and he just wrote down the question, "What's the secret to getting rich in Hollywood?" ? And he just let us look at that for a second, and they just wrote down, "Don't get divorced." and I always remember that. And I'm happy to say that this week my wife and I will be celebrating our 22nd wedding anniversary.
Wow, congratulations.
Thank you. And so, yeah, they were both really good about explaining what worked in my scripts, what didn't work in my scripts. And because for the first year and a half of that show, until Glenn Mazzara was brought on, I was the youngest, lowest level writer on that show. And so I learned a lot, but one of the things I learned is that you have to find your niche. Even if you're going to be the lowest level writer, what is the thing that you will do that will make you indispensable on the show? Because it only took me like a week and a half of being on that show to realize, well, this is great on the show, but man, my option's only for 20 weeks. Like, how am I going to make sure they pick up that option? Right?
Yeah.
And so what I realized was that they had writers on staff who were senior to me, people like Reed Steiner and Jed Seidel, and certainly Carlton and John, who really understood tonally how to write the show, and that I was never going to write the perfect Nash Bridges script, that it would always be polished by Carlton or John or Reed or Jed. But what I could do was I could really generate story. And I got good in the room of sort of trying to be the guy who could unlock a story problem, make a suggestion that was something they hadn't heard of before that they sort of liked but was in the zone. And so that's where I spent the bulk of my time, was in the writer's room, 10 a.m. till 7 p.m., Monday through Friday, breaking a new episode along with this group. And I would like to say, I don't think it's bragging to say I got to be very valuable in that regard for them. And that was the reason why, they kept picking up my options, and I spent 3 years working on that show. When my contract was up, they asked me to come back. But I felt that I'd kind of learned everything I had learned from that show, and found out that the person that Joss Whedon had hired instead of me on Buffy had flamed out pretty quickly. And that every time he called to sort of check about my availability, he was being told, well, Nash Bridges loves him and he's not available. Nash Bridges loves him, so he's not available. And so after 3 years, suddenly I was available, and I think I had become a little bit of the thing that he had lost 3 years ago. And so he brought me in for a meeting with David Greenwalt and Tim Minear on Angel, which was better for me because Angel is actually a show that was better suited for me and my sensibilities than Buffy was, because the sort of brooding male vampire was something I could plug into a little bit more than the teenage girl high schooler sort of thing. So I chose to leave Nash for Angel. which was the right decision for me. Although it was painful because I really loved the guys at Nash. I was flattered that they wanted me back. Secretly, I thought, well, they're going to have a hard time, replacing me and what I do, and they're really going to miss me. And when I chose not to come back, they replaced me with Damon Lindelof. And I did fine. So I always like it's a good way of keeping myself in check that you think you're special, but there's always a David Lindelof ready to staff in your place.
Wow. So when you created The Shield, you hadn't spent that much time in the room. I mean, you were 3 years on Nash, and was it 1 year on Angel?
It wasn't even a full one on Angel. I ended up being a credited producer for 19 of the 22 episodes, because what happened was at the tail end of my Nash Bridges run and the beginning of my Angel run, I had written a pilot script called The Barn that had come to Shield. Sort of wrote it on spec for Fox TV Studios with no network attached. And I just had the script floating out there that predated. And so I was just working on Angel. And once again, I'm like, well, how do I make sure that I get picked up for a second season? Because this is different. I took a chance. I took less money to go to Angel. I took less than a full year guarantee. I think they had only a 13 episode guarantee, and then they have the option to pick me up for the rest of the season. But I just felt like I could learn a whole new skill set there. So what happened was suddenly somebody gave that Barn script to the people at FX, who, unbeknownst to me, were devising a whole new idea for a whole new network. They knew they had the money to make 2 pilots. They had picked one of the pilots they wanted to make, and they read the script and were interested in this, and went and met with them, and they decided that they wanted my script to be the second one they made, but they would only do it if I was contractually free to make the pilot and to continue on series. And I was under option at Angel. So I suddenly went from being like, how do I get picked up on this show, to how can I get them to release me from this show?
Wow.
And I had to sit down with David Greenwalt, and I just explained the situation to him, and he was extraordinarily generous. He and his former partner, John McNamara, had been in a similar situation when they created the show Prophet, and John was on staff of Lois and Clark, and the studio had not let John off that show as a writer on staff to go run a show he had created. And the two of them, I believe, had always kind of resented the fact that they wouldn't do that. And they always said, well, we would never do that to someone. And so while he wasn't thrilled that he was losing, because it was not a big staff on Angel, while he was not thrilled that he was losing me, he was like, we're not, we always said we wouldn't stop someone from doing that. And then they worked out a deal with my agent where I was, they saved a little money, essentially. I was paid through episode 19, and I wasn't paid for episodes 20, 21, and 22. And my work was sort of done because episode 19 was the episode I had written. So they really needed. So they saved some money, and I got my freedom, and so it was almost a full season of Angel. I wrote or co-wrote 5 episodes of that show during those 19 that I worked on, and then my last day at Angel was on a Friday, and on the following Monday, I had a little conference room at the Fox TV Studios offices that they let me sit in, and I started having meetings with line producers and everything, and I just started working on the Shield pilot the following Monday. Wow!
So you had just gotten to the producer level on Angel, and then all of a sudden you're shooting a pilot. Like, that must have been foreign territory.
It was completely foreign, especially because Nash Bridges was a show that we wrote in Los Angeles, but we filmed in San Francisco. But because of the trickiness of Don Johnson as a lead, Don really, wanted to be the guy in charge, and he had had a huge success in television, and he had a ton of clout. And I guess before my arrival on Nash, if writers ever went up to set, Don saw that as a little challenge to his authority, and he would sort of make things uncomfortable for them. And so as a result, by the time I was on the show, we never went to set. All the time was spent in the writers' room just working on the things. So I had zero experience with production after 3 years of Nash. One of the reasons why I took the job at Angel was Angel filmed in Los Angeles, and I could experience some of that. So I did have a little production experience on Angel. I got a little time in the editing room observing a little bit of David Greenwalt, but mostly observing Tim Minear. I would make a couple suggestions that sometimes they would use. So I had just started getting a little bit of production and editing experience. So to suddenly show run The Shield was a huge sea change for me, and it was humbling. And I had to admit, the best thing I ever did was to be very open and honest and admit what I didn't know. So I hired an extraordinarily accomplished line producer and just said to him, when you see me going the wrong way, please tell me.
Yeah.
So this was Scott Brazil, and he was great. What I knew about The Shield was I knew that world, and I knew the characters, and I knew the stories I wanted to tell. And I had spent the last 4 years on very small staffs breaking a ton of stories. So it would have been somewhere in the high 80s, the number of episodes that I had helped craft on a story breaking front. And so I knew I could do that, and I knew I could do that well. And then the other stuff I was going to have to figure out along the way. But I hired people who, especially with Scott, who could fill in the areas of my weaknesses. And I was humble enough to let them fill in those long enough for me to figure things out myself. And I, years later, when, because when I had my very first media FX, Kevin Riley, who was head of programming there, working underneath Peter Liguri, Kevin said, we want to make this pilot, but we only want to do it if you can show run it and then lead the show if it goes to series. Do you think you're up to that?
Wow.
And I, without flinching, said yes. But in my mind, I was not sure.
Yeah.
But in that moment, you have to say yes.
Yeah.
And then I worked hard to live up to that promise to him. And I asked him years later, I said, usually in these cases with a young writer who has some experience but not a lot, they'll sort of pair him or her up with some experienced showrunner. I said, why did you not do that? And he said, all I knew was that I wanted the person who'd written that script to be the person making the decisions about it. Now, I think there was another thing that he never truly admitted to me, and that was that of the two pilots they were making, I really think the other one was the one they thought was going to go to series, and not ours. I've heard talk about that from people who worked at FX. I never heard that from Kevin and Peter. But I think they thought the other one was going to be the one, excuse me, that they were going to pick. And we were the sort of flyer backstop. And then ultimately, I think, humility aside, I think we made an undeniable pilot that when they looked, and I ultimately saw the other pilot. It was called Dope, and it was written by Chris Brancato. Bert Salke produced it with him, and it was good. I mean, it was not a disaster. It wasn't like they, screwed it up. I think it was good. But there was something about ours that I think they thought would, define FX and, was unlike other things on TV. And so I think that was another reason why he let me be in charge was I think they thought the other thing was going to be the thing that would go. So then when we made the pilot and they really loved it, it was good, and I had overseen that, well, then they decided not to bring someone in oversee it. But it was we went back and forth, and there were, and I got lucky there. Once again, you'll hear me a number of times in this conversation talk about in the road and moments where I got lucky. There were a couple of things that Kevin was pushing for in the first 6-7 episodes. We agreed on a lot, and they liked a lot of what we were doing, and then they would have notes that I liked and we would implement. But there were a couple of times where we were at odds. One was after the pilot, Kevin wanted to fire Walton Goggins and lose the character from the show.
Really?
And I understood why. He didn't have a lot to do in the pilot, and he was kind of like a big personality, but we hadn't given him the material to sort of embrace that. But I got to know Walton during the pilot, and I'd seen a short film that he had produced that ultimately won the Oscar for short film, and he was in. I learned what he was capable of, and I saw where we could go with him. And essentially, I pushed back on Kevin, and I explained, give me a couple of episodes with him. I think it's the wrong decision to fire him. I think, there's really important stuff here. And we did, and we wrote him a big thing in episode 2, and he was great in it. And we got the note back from the network, more Walton Goggins. Not only was it not fire him, but look to beef him up in the scripts.
Wow.
So that decision helped in terms of earning currency from Kevin. And then there was an episode called Cherry Poppers that was a really sort of risky episode. The material was really kind of, not even R-rated, I would say. It was almost pushing NC-17 rating kind of stuff. Not in terms of nudity, but just like in terms of in terms of content about the sort of sex trade world and underage girls and everything. And they had some problems with the script. And the notes that we got back from them were, I just disagreed with some of them. And I sort of said why. And ultimately he said, okay, do it. And then when that episode came in, they really loved the cut. And he was lovely enough and professional enough to just flat out come out to me and say, hey, I was wrong about my thoughts on the script. This is great. Wow. And from that moment on, I had earned, I guess, the trust with them. So we would still have disagreements along the way. And then they'd have, they'd point out things they thought could be improved. And usually they'd be right. And we would improve them. But in those moments where it was like, well, we want A, I want B, neither of us can convince the other side, they would say, okay, well, we'll let you win then.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, I know we could talk about The Shield for quite a while, but we definitely do need to move on. Maybe what you can do for me is paint for me the signpost of the next few years. You created a number of series during that time. I mean, were there projects that you expected to go that didn't, or expected not to go and did?
Well, I always think they're going to go. So, and it's always relief when they do, and it's always disappointment when they don't. You put your heart and soul in these things. I can't imagine doing that and assuming it's not going to go. And I'm always angry and bitter and disappointed when they don't. David Mamet had directed an episode of The Shield. In college, I, like many people of my era, really revered David's playwriting and everything. To get to know him in that process was so cool, to come meet him for lunch and, check out a little bit of his movie. And at lunch, he said, hey, I've got this idea because there's this book and I'd like to turn a TV show. Would you want to do it with me? So that was a big moment for me when a guy whose writing I admired so much, wanted to do a project with me, and we turned that into The Unit. That went 4 seasons. I'm extraordinarily proud. It's one of the few TV shows that certainly had existed up till that time that investigated and sort of showed a real-life war, in this case the war on terror and in Afghanistan and Iraq, that was happening in real time. Obviously a show like MASH during Vietnam, but was, portraying Korea, although, people assumed it was saying things about Vietnam. So I was, really proud of that show. I'm proud of each one. And sometimes just as proud, if not more proud, of ones I'm overseeing rather than creating. Mad Dogs is still a show. It's on Amazon. It only ran one season, but I really dig that show a lot. And going down to Puerto Rico to film that, was really interesting and exposed me to a part of the world I hadn't seen before. I just get excited about these projects. I get excited about a world and characters, and I just want to write for them. And when it doesn't work out, like there was a script that I oversaw that Ron Fitzgerald had written. He's one of the two showrunners behind this new Perry Mason series that's about to come out on HBO now. Mm-hmm. He wrote the script called Badlands for HBO that I just thought was one of the best scripts I'd ever written. Ever read, including ones I've written. Mm-hmm. I just thought it was spectacular. And it was in 2012, 2013. And it completely illustrated and predicted the Trump era in terms of, rural white America and the opioid crisis and declining life expectancies and everything. And it was so beautiful, and we could just not get HBO, in my opinion, to get outside their LA, New York bubble and get behind this show that took place in Montana. And I just think of the lost opportunity there, what that show would have said and what it would have predicted and what it would have illustrated, in that 2013 to 2016 period. As the Trump phenomenon, was building and then happening, I think would have been amazing, would have made HBO proud, but we never got the opportunity to make that. So, that's one on the bad side that, I still to this day just go, oh my God, it was so good.
We're going to take a break to hear from our sponsors, and we'll be right back to talk about Timeless. DrivingFootage.com provides 4K 9-angle driving plates for film and television. Over 14,000 clips are available for locations all around Southern California, with more areas coming soon. A fully equipped camera car with height-adjustable rig is available for custom shoots and second-unit photography. Visit DrivingFootage.com for details. AVGearGuide.com provides computer and gear rentals serving the LA area, including laptops with Final Draft, as low as $9 a day, with long booking rates available. They also scan photos, documents, video and audio tapes, and film reels to digital, so you can easily share with your friends and family. Mention the name of the TV Writer Podcast, and you will get 10% off your order. Visit avgearguide.com for details. Full disclosure, I do own both of these companies. By supporting them, you help me bring new in-person video interviews to you. And we're back to talk about Timeless. Why don't you park a little bit on Timeless? Because this was a project that was a little different than some of the other ones that you had done. Can you tell me about what it was like to create that show and to run that show?
Well, I give all the credit to Eric Kirpke, my co-creator on the show. I'd heard the name Eric Kirpke. I'd never met Eric Kirpke. And I can't remember now whether it was an email or a phone call, but essentially Eric cold called me or cold emailed me because he had an idea. He had just the nugget of a show that he wanted to do, but having, had the bruises of being like the sole showrunner on his previous show, he was looking for someone to partner up with, and and he had a deal at Sony where I'm located, and somebody had shown him a roster of, other showrunner writers that were under deals with Sony, and for some reason he decided, Shawn Ryan, and we didn't know each other, but he cold called me or cold emailed me and was like, hey, I've got a pitch for an idea, and I'd love to pitch to you. And I thought it was really strange at the time because we get writers approaching, but usually they're writers who have not created their own shows. So Eric had certainly had a lot of success, and I was a little mystified, like why he doesn't need me to do something. So what is that all about? It's strange. And so he came in and said, I have this idea, and but I really don't want to do it alone. I want to do it with someone. And at the end of that, I said, well, listen, the nugget of an idea kind of intrigues me. What I like is that, I grew up on sci-fi stuff and shows like Quantum Leap and movies like The Future, and I love it, but I'm known as the cop guy and, the stuff. And so I love the opportunity to use Eric's sort of credentials in that world to insert myself into that world. Yeah. But I said, you're so successful without me. And I don't know how. I'm used to getting my way. You're used to getting your way. I don't know how that would work. I said, so why don't we do this? Why don't we just commit to a week? You and I get into a writer's room by ourselves for a week. Mm-hmm. Let's see where we can take this story. And more importantly, let's see whether we can work together or not. And so we did that. And we broke the pilot episode of Timeless together. And we ended up liking each other and working well with each other. At the end of it, we were like, yeah, this works. Let's do this. So he's been just a tremendous partner for me. I've learned a ton from him. He and I are different in the way that we approach show running. And I'd like to think that I taught him a few things, and I know that he taught me a few things. And it was just always a sort of best idea wins. And, we knew that but also one person could sort of veto anything, right? So we had to get the scripts to a place where both he and I were happy. And forging, that, threading that needle usually led to good scripts. And then we found other ways to divide things. So he would oversee all the visual effects. I would oversee the music. I would do the early editing work and then sort of present what I had to him. And then, he would weigh in and sort of do his notes. He did a little bit more sort of story time in the writer's room than I did. And so we found a way to divide up the work and that's what we did. So, I loved the idea of using Timeless as a show to explore history. A history buff. I always like to read books about things. I'm especially interested in sort of forgotten history and, not just World War II, but, and there was a book that we sort of read that I think it was called The People's History that sort of focused on the people who don't usually get the headlines and things. And so while we did do some episodes with like Abraham Lincoln and stuff, my favorites were probably the ones where we introduced the audience to people who we thought should be significant historically, but for various reasons weren't. And a lot of times those were people that were, historically marginalized, whether it was women or people of color and everything. And so, I've never had an experience like Timeless. I've had shows that were successful. I've had shows that weren't as successful. I've never had a show that had a fan base that was as rabid and loyal and just outright amazing as the Timeless fan base was. We were a show that got canceled after season 1, and literally the fans rose up to the point that Bob Greenblatt reconsidered his decision and Jen Salke reconsidered her decision. Yeah. And, and 48 hours later, we were picked up for a second season. We got canceled again after the second season, and the fans just did not want the story to end there.
Wow.
And there's a narrative that, fan voices, that's stuff that Hollywood people whip up, but it doesn't really mean anything to the bean counters. I swear to you that fan enthusiasm for this show literally got us a pickup from season 1 to season 2. And then at the end of season 2, when we got canceled again, really guilted the NBC leadership into allowing us to make a 2-hour movie. That 2-hour movie was not a money-making situation for the network or the studio. I think everyone sort of broke even on it. But they felt an obligation to passionate fans to allow us to tell some sort of conclusion of the story, which I think we have. Now, does that mean that Timeless is over forever? I don't think it does. I think these fans, I think the size of the fandom is only going to grow. I think absence is going to make the heart seem fonder. I think in this world in which more and more programming is becoming sort of niche for certain audiences, it would not surprise me if in a year or 3 years or something, there's going to be an appetite to, revive the timeless world in some way. And and my understanding is that, the actors like, Abby and Matt and Malcolm and Claudia and company, I think they'd all be down for it. So I never want to overpromise to the fans, and I never want to, say, oh, this is going to happen and that not happen. But I've seen Timeless be resurrected twice before, and I think there's a possibility that whether it's in a series of sort of 2 or 4 hour bursts of, little sort of special movies, or whether it's some short season or something, and where it would be, I don't know.
Or one
Probably
of the
not.
streaming networks. I mean, they've picked
Maybe.
up shows.
I think if, I'm not sure if Timeless, I got to find out if Timeless is streaming somewhere specifically right now, but it's the kind of show that I think would binge well, and it just takes one place to say, oh, we'd like to, because I think that would draw a lot of traffic to, whether it was a Peacock network thing or an HBO Max or something. I think if you said, hey, we have all the episodes of Timeless, and now here's the 2 hour movie or the 4 separate hours 3 years later, I think it would draw a lot of traffic. So maybe I'm being overly optimistic, but I've seen Timeless be resurrected twice, and it wouldn't shock me to see it happen again.
Yeah, very, very cool. Well, we're getting fairly close to the end of our time here. Maybe just a couple of general questions. So how do you feel about peak TV and the sort of the current landscape, and how does that affect your development of shows?
Some things are easier, some things are harder. There's a shortage of good line producers because the business has expanded so much. So that puts a lot of pressure on productions. There's issues with crews and a shortage of good crews in certain cities, a lot of these tax rebate cities. We had a lot of issues in Vancouver, where I think we were one of like 53 productions, season 1 of Timeless happening in Vancouver. And when you're late in, you're losing people every week to other shows. It was really difficult in ways that you look and you go, well, did we even really save money being in this tax rebate place because of all the extra things we have to do? That's hard. My biggest worry is that TV has been so successful for the last 20 years, let's call it, starting with like The Sopranos, creatively and everything. And you've seen a decline, in my opinion, not in individual movies, but the movie industry as a whole. And what I'm seeing now is that the TV industry is starting to be populated with a lot of movie people, and they're starting to adopt a lot of the movie tactics that, to me, actually ruined the movie business. And everything's sort of star-driven. The old mantra in TV used to be that TV made stars. But what we're seeing now more and more is that, yes, there's more places to sell the stuff, but you've got to have Brad Pitt starring in your show. I'm not saying that you shouldn't have shows like that. If Brad Pitt wants to star in a show or a limited series, that's great. But I'm seeing less of an appetite because the networks feel, and maybe they're right, but I would provide evidence to the contrary, that they need these stars to be noticed in a 500-channel universe. But when I look at the things that that we look at as creative, critical, and commercial hits, when I look at a show like Breaking Bad, you had a sitcom actor in Bryan Cranston, playing a drug dealer. That wasn't star-driven. That was, a really great story, really well told. Mad Men, was a Matthew Weiner creation. John Hamm had been doing guest star episodes of The Unit for us, right before doing Mad Men. So I worry that, to me, these are the shows that really resonate with people, and yet it feels like a lot of the things that wreck the film industry are starting to worm their way into the television industry, and it concerns me.
Well, we're almost at the end of our time. What would you say if advice to younger writers, advice to people who are breaking in, what would you say are the maybe mistakes you see people making, or the things that you would like to see in people you interview?
Yeah, there's a story I tell that people generally like. I'll tell here, so I apologize if people have heard me say this before. So if you go back to the beginning of this program, I talked about how I had this initial success, won this award and everything. And then I spent a few years writing stuff and not getting hired. And I was starting to now get to be in my late 20s, which was less cute to not have made it than it was when I was 23. And I got concerned, and I went to my manager and I said, listen, I think these scripts I'm writing are really good, but clearly they're not getting me work. And so will you do me a favor? Will you give me a script of another client of yours where that script is getting that writer offers? And I'd like to read it because I'd like to figure out what I'm missing, essentially. And he gave me an X-Files script that Tim Minear had written and that had gotten Tim a lot of offers on shows. And I read it. And what I realized was that the high points of that script weren't necessarily a lot better than the high points of my script, but every single word worked. There was attention to detail to every single page, every single line. It was just more consistent than what I had. And I said, okay, I see now. I have assumed that my writing was better than it is. That's the problem. The problem isn't the outside world. The problem is me. I said, from now on, I'm not going to turn a script in till I know that is the absolute best thing I can possibly write. I've been settling. I'm stopping saying this is good enough. A B+ is good enough. It needs to be an A. And the next two scripts I wrote, one was a Larry Sanders spec script, one was a NYPD Blue spec script. I put that mantra into being. I just was like, I'm going to be my toughest critic. I'm going to put it down for a week. When I look, I'm going to say, what would my biggest enemies say about the script? What would they pick apart? And then I'm going to fix those things so that there's nothing for anyone to pick apart. And those two scripts are what got me all my paying jobs for the next couple of years and got me my first staff job. So what I would say is, if you're not in the position you want to be in, don't blame the town. Don't blame the industry. Say, my writing isn't good enough right now. And I've got to be better at it. And I've got to get it from a B+ to an A. That would be my advice, because that is something you can control. You can't control whether some executive at NBC is going to like your script or not. You can't control the circumstances under which they read it. You can just control power to make sure that it is the absolute best work you can do, and have a real assessment of your talent. Do you have the talent to do this? And if so, then exercise that talent. If not, maybe change the genres. Maybe I'm not an action adventure writer. Maybe I need to be more of a relationship writer. So find the niche that's going to work for you, and then just be the best you can be at it. And the town is tough, but the minute I stopped feeling sorry for myself, and the minute I took responsibility and said, whether I get hired will depend on me and how good the script is, that's when everything happened for me. So that's the advice I'd give.
Very cool. Well, that is a great place to end up. And I really, really appreciate all the time you've taken here. I know you've got an appointment to get to in just a second. I think people are going to love this interview.
Oh, well, great questions. I enjoyed the talk. Sorry if I dominated it. I get excited when I talk about things. So sorry if you didn't get all the questions you wanted. But, down the line, if there's more things you want to ask, be happy to come back. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Shawn. Make sure to subscribe on all of the places you can find this podcast: YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, Podbean, and also make sure to rate the podcast and submit your comments. Please do follow me on Twitter @GrayJones is my handle, and also visit tvwriterpodcast.com/support for details on how you can become a patron of this podcast for as little as 25 cents per episode. Well, that's it for this week. I appreciate you joining me. See you next time. Bye-bye.